So we're going to do chapter 3, using shapes to create artwork for a postcard is what it's called in our book. We're going to look at different artboards. We kind of saw that last week in our first practice, how there's different artboards. When we do this one today, we're going to have two artboards. One is going to be the postcard, and the other one is just kind of going to be workspace where we're going to assemble things and then drag over onto our postcard. We're going to work with live shapes and round some corners. We're going to work with the shaper tool and different drawing modes, and I'm also going to show you image trace, which I think if you're not familiar with it, you're going to like it pretty much. So in Illustrator, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new document. We're not going to open anything right away from the book files. So we can do this Create New button over here on the left, or we can do File New or Command N. All three get you to the same option. And the screen that pops up that says New Document, I'm going to turn on this first light, gives you some standard presets for what you maybe worked with most recently. There we go. So anything you did recently will show up here. So if you're always working on a certain document size because that's what the, I don't know, the TVs are or the whatever output you're making it for, that would show up here. But they also have some kind of presets in here. And if you look at that top row, you see mobile. Let's just click on mobile and see what we find. So it's showing if you're working on an iPhone X, here are the dimensions, 1125 by 2436 pixels, which is nice because you wouldn't want to have to measure out an iPhone and try to get that right. The other thing that these presets do is they set up resolution for you. So if we click on the Web tab, excuse me, we're going to see that we're set up in pixels as well. 1300 by 768 is a common blank preset for that. If we go to print, we are going to see larger size documents, a letter, A4 paper, legal paper, tabloid paper. Film and video is set up based on screen sizes and again pixels. And then art and illustration is typically high res print quality again, so we have posters, postcards, whatever. So we're going to go to the Print tab, and we're not going to choose any of these presets. We're going to go over to the preset details on the right-hand side here, and instead of this being called Untitled, we're going to name this Postcard. And then on the next line down, we're going to change our measurement from points into inches. So now you can see the IN shows up after in the width and height. We're going to change our width to be 6. We don't even have to type in IN because it knows based on our measurement that we just added. And then if you hit Tab, you move to the next box, and we want to type in 4.25 inches for our height. Orientation, is this going to be tall, 6 inches tall, or 6 inches wide? We want to go with landscape orientation, so click on that second icon, and that's going to make the 6 inches be the width. And then right from this screen, you have the option to tell it how many artboards you want. Like I said, we're going to be making this postcard, but we're going to set up a second artboard that we can draw things on and create things to drag into our original one. So we're just going to up arrow or type in a number 2, whatever you want to do, but we're going to tell it to have 2 artboards. The rest of this, where it talks about bleed, if you knew what you wanted for that, and we'll learn about it in just a minute, you could certainly type it in here. If you forget or you change your mind, I'm going to show you how you can change it after the fact. So this is our basic that we're going to do, and then we're going to say create. And to fit all in the screen, the shortcut is Command Option 0. Fit all. All right, so we have our 2 artboards. Let's do a File, Save As, and we're going to give it a name. And we're going to put it in our Lesson 3 folder because we're working on Lesson 3 today. So in your lessons, you probably have Your book files, we're going to just place this one that we're making in the Lesson 3 folder. So you can navigate to that. Click Save. Oops, I forgot to name it. Cancel. File, Save As. The name I want you to give it is your first name and then postcard. And then we're going to put it in the folder of Lesson 3. If this is what your view looks like, if it's a smaller window, to the right of the folders, there's a down arrow, and if you click on that, you see more options, and then you can step back one folder to the lesson folder, and therefore find all the different folders inside of it, choose Lesson 3, and say Save. We're going to accept all of these default Illustrator settings and just hit OK. Yep. I think because you didn't change the document to be wide instead of tall. Okay. So we'll change it and I'll show you in just a second. Yep. But you do need your toolbars. Where are they? Yeah. Did you guys work? No. Okay. Yeah, yours are tall instead of wide. Okay, so I mentioned, like, if you have a glitch where you forgot to change it to landscape instead of from portrait, or I mentioned this idea of bleed. Does anybody know what bleed means when you're talking about print?
Actually printing the document, they always ask for that for the stuff for
yes.
Printing. Like, oh, there are things in here so that it's the edges like that.
Yeah, the color goes to the edges when you do bleed. So anything that is, the color goes off the edges, like this book. The file, let's just say that this is a 5x7 size book, exactly. The file that created this was not 5 by 7 inches. It was actually probably 5 1/4 by 7 1/4, and there's 1/8 of an inch of extra space all around that this background color goes on also. That way when they print it, it's slightly bigger than they really need it, and when they cut it, the color's going to run right off the edge. That's called bleed. If you don't do that, and on this printer, it cannot print a bleed. You cannot print to edge on this printer, period. It doesn't work. So you'll always have a little white outline around it. So the only way we can pretend to have bleeds using this printer is to make our file slightly bigger, print it on bigger paper, and then use the paper cutter and trim it down to its final size. Okay, so that's what bleed is. So if we want to add bleed to this document, this is, by the way, this 4.25 by 6, this is what the postcard is actually physically going to be when it's cut. But when we add bleed, we're going to put a red line a little bit further out. Typically, bleeds are 1/8 of an inch on both sides, so it adds up to 1/4 of an inch each when you do 1/8 and 1/8. And then your color, your background extends all the way out to those. The artboard itself is the live area that will print and ultimately be cut down to. So if we want to go back and add that or fix any issues, over in your Properties panel on the right-hand side, about halfway down under Quick Actions, you should see Document Setup. Click on that. It's going to look almost like what we just had before. This is where we want to add our bleed. I thought maybe, why don't you try the Edit Artboards button and see if you can fix your directions. Everybody else, though, we're just going to add a bleed at this point. So, do you see where it says bleed, top, bottom, left, right? We're going to want to add 1/8 of an inch, and we're going to just type into this first one 0.125 inches. And because this little lock thing is on here, all 4 of them automatically populate with that same number. So it added a 1/8 of an inch bleed on all 4 pieces. Did you get it to fix?
No.
Okay, I'll help you. Or you might just want to close it and make a new file, because it'll be almost as quick to make a new one.
Okay.
So by adding our bleed here, we're just going to say okay. And now what we see is a red guideline all the way around. That's showing us if we want color to bleed off of this postcard when it's actually trimmed and cut down, we need to put our background art all the way out to these red line points, okay? All right, we now have our 2 artboards and we have our bleed set up around the edges and we're ready to go. So we are now going to learn how to make shapes in Illustrator. And please remember what I told you the first day. When you think about Illustrator and drawing, we really need to think about it as shape building. Not just pure, here's a line, here's a line, here's a line, because you can't fill that line with a color or a texture or a gradient. It's 3 lines that don't have anything to do with each other. If we want a triangle, we make a closed shape, not 3 individual lines that have nothing to do with each other. So think about it from the construction paper standpoint, where we're cutting out big shapes and then stacking other shapes on top and behind it to make different looks. So we're going to learn about building shapes. So a path in Illustrator can be open or closed. So by default, all of your shapes have strokes and fills. The stroke is the outline that goes around it, and it can be a color and it can be a thickness. And a fill?
Fill is the space within the shape.
The what?
The space within the shape.
Yeah. So if you make a closed circle and it comes all the way back to the beginning, that's a closed shape. This is the fill, the stroke is the outside part. But what if you make a lazy circle and it stops right there and it's not a closed shape? It's still going to behave the same way. The color is going to fill in here. Let's say I made a worse lazy circle. The color is going to fill in here, but it's going to stop right here because it's going to connect the lines that didn't exist, right? So if you have a black stroke and a yellow fill and you expect it to be a circle, but there's this flat line there, you know that you failed to close the path, really. So any paths that we do can be open or they can be closed. And that's kind of the gist of Illustrator. If when you're drawing things and making colors, or like maybe you think you made a rectangle filled with red, but when you look, it has this diagonal from the bottom to the top, that means that you failed to finish closing out the rectangle. And it took the last point you had and connected it to the first point you had with a straight line, because it had to put the fill in it, okay? All right, let's start with rectangles. First thing we're going to do is navigate to Artboard 2. So go down to your lower left corner on your screen and click either the arrow to the right or the down arrow where it shows you your 2 different artboards, 1 and 2. Select Artboard 2 and fit it in the window with a Command 0. We're going to be working, building stuff on Artboard 2. All right, the rectangle tool is the 5th tool down in your toolbar. Go ahead and click on the rectangle tool and bring your cursor over into the artboard. And let's first make sure that we all have our smart guides turned on. So I want you to go to the window drop-down box, or no, I'm sorry, the view, and look about 3/4 of the way down and make sure that smart guides have a check in front of them. Command U is the shortcut that turns them on and off. Most of the time they're helpful and you want them on. They basically draw lines for you so that you can line up things parallel or perpendicular to each other. They snap you to a grid. They're very helpful until a moment comes where you don't want them on, and then you can turn them off. So make sure that smart guides are on, and then we're going to come back with our rectangle tool and we're going to have our cursor in our artboard. And we're going to click and drag. We're going to make a tall, skinny rectangle that's approximately 0.5 wide by 2 inches tall. And as you drag, you're going to get a tooltip that tells you about what size it is. Okay? So, why am I at an angle? What the heck? Do you guys see the tooltip showing? That gray thing? Okay. I'm on some kind of alternate planet right now because instead of drawing a straight rectangle, I'm getting this very strange. All right, what's going on? Oh boy, really? This is how today's gonna go? All right, well, hopefully I'll fix it in a minute. So 0.5 wide by 2 inches tall, approximately. It doesn't have to be perfect, so when you get close to that zone, let it go. I just intentionally made mine stand up straight. That's very strange. Okay. With our rectangle tool still selected, so we're still using that same tool, we're going to move our pointer over the small blue dot in the center. And once we hover over that center blue dot, our cursor changes to have that like dot to dot rectangle underneath it. We can now drag the shape using the center point, and we can drag it down to the bottom center of our artboard. Normally you would have to switch tools to the select tool to move something around, but when you grab that center widget using still the rectangle tool, you're able to drag it around, and you can put it towards the bottom of your artboard. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to resize shapes using the bounding boxes and dragging in and out. And you probably have a pretty good idea of how that's going to work, but we're going to add some keyboard modifiers to make it behave in a certain way. So we're going to drag the right middle bounding point, so this one right over here, not that center point, we're doing the actual anchors on the outside of the shape. We're going to drag that to the left to make it a little bit more narrow. But while we drag very slowly, we're going to hold down the Option key, and that's going to make it shrink in from both sides or expand from both sides equally. So I'm holding the Option key while I'm dragging to get it to behave this way. It's keeping the center point, but making it smaller or bigger from both directions. The size that we want to do is approximately a width of 0.3. So make it a little bit smaller than it was, and then you let go of your mouse and then your key. All right, the other thing that you can do is hold your cursor just slightly off the top right or top left bounding point, and you should get a curved arrow. When you click and drag this, you're now twisting it on that center axis, and that's how I straightened mine out because it drew crooked. We want to do that, but we also want to hold the Shift key as we're dragging, and that's going to limit us to 45 degrees angles. So we're going to get our measurement to show 315, and then we're going to let go of our mouse and then our cursor. All right, we're going to leave this shape selected, but we're going to look at it a little bit closer, so I want you to zoom in on it. And the easiest way to do that is Command+ to zoom in. So at a closer view especially, you're able to see these circle widgets that are inside of the shape. Sometimes when you're zoomed out too far, you really can't see those or can't get a good view of them. So zooming in is very helpful. We're going to take our selection tool. So that's that black arrow at the top. We're going to take the selection tool and we're going to click and drag on any one of these circles. Drag in towards the center of the rectangle, and notice that it is curving all 4 corners equally as we click and drag in. So it's that widget inside. You're going to click and drag, and eventually there's a point of no more curving. You've gotten to the maximum curve that can be achieved. So we now have rounded corners on our rectangle. How far you pull or what number you choose to do is up to you. It's no worry right now. So everybody good? All right, over in your properties panel, the top grouping is the transform panel, and it has the width and height, the X and Y coordinates. That's if this were on graph paper, if you guys remember from any math classes, if this were on graph paper, this would tell you that its location is on the X-axis 2.8 inches and 314. Sometimes you want to place things exactly using X and Y coordinates, but for the most part, you don't ever really look at that. The width and height of the actual shape you do. At the bottom right of that transform panel, there are 3 dots that are the more information. So click on that, and you're going to get this other window that comes up. And you can see after the first 2 lines, there are 4 lines that show how rounded the corners are and how the corners look. And there's one for each corner: top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. All right, in here, we are going to clean this up so that they all are exactly the same. Everybody in the class is going to be the same, despite how we drag them out. We're going to type in 0.125, and if you hit tab, that's going to auto-populate it on all 4 of them because the lock isn't in the center.
Where are the 3 dots?
Right here, the
okay, I'm
transform.
sorry.
Yep, nope, that's fine.
What are we putting there?
0.125. Yep,
Where?
so right here in this section, where the 4 corners are, whatever you would drag to on your own might have been that distance, or that roundness might not have been. We're just all making it the same.
What was the number again?
0.125 or 0.125. And if you hit tab, because this lock is locked down in the center of the 4 of them, all 4 of them are going to be the same. So that rounded all 4 corners to that exact amount.
This show. Require more options, like forever.
Okay, so we just used the selection tool, the black arrow, right? And remember what that does that's different from the direct selection tool? How do they differ? What's the direct selection tool do? Anybody remember?
It'll select the points directly.
Yeah. So the selection tool, the black arrow, when you click on a shape, you get the whole shape. The direct selection tool, you're actually clicking on a specific anchor point and modifying that. Or you're selecting 2 of the anchor points. It's not the shape, it's specific anchor points. So we're going to switch to our direct selection tool, which is, shortcut is A, and it's that white arrow. And our shape should still be selected. We should still see the bounding box kind of around it in a different way, but we can see all of our points. We're going to double click in the top corner widget. So this top circle, like bullseye, we're going to double click on that. That not only chose that corner, it also brought up a dialog box that's talking about it. So what's the radius of it? We had typed in 0.125, it rounded to 0.13, but we also see where we have some options of how the corner looks. We're actually going to take this corner out. We're going to type in 0 and click OK. That's going to take out the rounding on just that one corner. Notice the other 3 corners are still perfectly rounded. All right, we're going to do the same with that. Yep.
I'm not getting that box.
Are you in the direct selection tool, the white arrow? And then double click on that top bullseye.
Oh shoot, I need a
All right, we're now going to go down to the bottom corner widget. So the bullseye that's at the bottom right corner down here, we're going to double click on that one to do the exact same thing. So it's bringing up that same, it selected this corner radius, and we're going to take that one down to 0 also. So we're going to make those 2 opposite corners have right angles, not rounded corners. If you wanted to, I'm going to just undo one step. You guys just watch, Command Z. If you wanted to simply do that by dragging, you could do that as well. So by simply dragging until you're at 0, you also can turn it into a 0. So double clicking brings up the dialog box where you can type in actual numbers. Dragging, you do it by sight. Okay? Getting back to 0 is actually pretty easy, but getting to a specific rounded corner, not quite as easy. All right, let's go back and get our selection tool. Letter V will jump you to the black arrow, the selection tool. And our shape is still selected. You can see now that we selected using this tool, it puts the bounding box around it. So we have that corner that comes out a little further. Now what we want to do is give this some color or a fill. So we are going to come over with it selected. We're going to come to our properties panel. And in the second box down, we see appearance and we see fill right now is white. We're going to click on that color swatch, that white square, And then your swatches may look different than mine. I'm going to click on this. I have a feeling. Does that look more like what yours look like when you click on the color swatch? So in this color, when you click on the fill button, you have two different views. You have the swatch panel, which shows you a little square of everything, or you have the color mixer, which you get to actually mix the 4 colors of ink. I'll touch on this lightly right now, but we're going to have it a lot more in all of our classes, plus in Design Fundamentals with Mary. Whenever we print something on paper or any other product, we use 4 inks. Cyan, magenta, yellow, and registration or black is kind of what it is. Believe it or not, those 4 inks, when mixed together, give us everything that we need to see color. So that's where you see CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black. Because we originally set up this document, our very first step was we told it was a print document. It knew that it had to be in the CMYK color space. Print has to be in that. When you set up a web document or anything that's going to be shown on a screen, the color space is RGB, red, green, blue. That is created, believe it or not, by light. So if you think of 3 spotlights, a red spotlight, a blue spotlight, and a green spotlight shining on one thing, in different mixes of light, they're going to make every color that we can see on a screen. So if we set up a web document first, it's going to automatically put us in the RGB color space. Because we told this to be a print document, it's automatically in CMYK. All right. So let's go back to the swatches view. And they want us to fill it with a darker red. So pick a color that you consider to be darker red. And by doing that, our shape fills perfectly. We're then going to come over and click on the stroke icon. Right now there's a black outline on it, or a black stroke. We want to remove that. So if you click on the stroke little thumbnail thingy, we get our same swatches again. The very first one in the list is a white bar, or a white box with a red slash through it. That means none. Click on that, and that means no stroke. It removed the stroke completely. So we have a red fill, white stroke. I'm sorry, no stroke, not white. Everybody have that shape? Okay, we're now going to make this like X-shaped thing. So we're going to copy this shape, and then we're going to actually rotate it and paste a copy of it. So our starting point with the shape still selected is we're going to do an edit copy, which is Command C, just like it is in Word and everything else. However, now it gets a little different. Don't do a regular paste. We want to do an edit, paste in front, Command F. That put a copy of this exactly on top of the previous one, so it doesn't look any different, but we have 2 of them stacked up right now. All right, we're going to move our cursor just slightly off the corner until we get the rounded corners, and then we're going to start pulling this top shape to the left. If we hold the Shift key when we do it, we're going to constrain, and we're going to go to 45 degrees. So we're pulling that top copy off to the left at a 45-degree angle. When you get there, let go of your cursor, then your modifier key. So we took that copy and twisted it to the left. With that top copy selected, we're going to click on our fill button again over here on the right in the appearance panel, and we're going to choose a slightly lighter version of red for our top item. So there are 2 different colors. All right, right now we only have these 2 shapes on our artboard. So selecting them could be very easy. With one more click, we could do it. The way the book has us doing it works great also. We're going to go to the Select menu up at the top of the screen, and we're going to say Select All on the active artboard. Notice it puts a bounding box around all of the shapes, and we want to group them together so that when we move one, the whole shape moves, not just one of those pieces. So with both of them selected, go to the bottom of your Properties panel and click on the Group button. We don't see any change, but now when we go to move this, it's going to move together as one group. If you had 80 different pieces of art on this artboard and you wanted to select all of them to do something with them, that method I just showed you, select all on the active artboard, is way faster than doing a bunch of clicking or whatever. It's a lot easier. So we all should have this lovely shape made, and we're done with that. We're going to deselect this item. You can simply click away in a blank area, so there's no bounding box around it, and we're free to start doing our next shape. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to round the corners of a rectangle using a different method. So instead of using those live dots on the inside, we're going to use the transform panel to do that. Zoom out so you can see more of your artboard so you know where you have some workspace. We're going to grab the rectangle tool again. And then in a blank area to the right of this X, we're simply going to click once. So instead of drawing out a shape, you also have the option of clicking once and then telling it how big it should be, what width and what height. From here, we're going to tell it to have a width of 0.2, and then if you hit the tab button, we want a height of 1.5 inches. Then we're going to say OK. Why is mine making everything crooked? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. Huh? This all right. Well, there we go. I'm going to overwrite it. So we now all have a rectangle of the same height. If you drew that out, wow, and you decided that you wanted some different measurements, right now we have it selected on our artboard, and because of that, we can see it up in our properties panel. So we can see that right now mine is a 1.532 by a 2.34. It wasn't nearly as perfect as I had thought. We are going to change the height and the width here in our properties panel. And the first thing we need to do is make sure that to the right of the width and height, do you guys see this like chain link thing with a slash through it? That means that the width and height are not connected, meaning it's not proportional. If I change one, the other won't automatically change to keep the same proportions. And that's good because right now we want to change them both manually, not proportionately. And our width value, let's type in a 0.1. And in our height value, let's type in 1 inch. Okay, leave it selected, and we're just going to zoom in on the top of this rectangle tool so we can see what we're doing. So I'm going to use Command plus a few times so I can see the top of this rectangle. Again, it has the live shapes. It still has those bullseyes, if you will, that we could use to round things. Take your selection tool, letter V, and drag any one of those corner widgets or those bullseyes until we see a measurement of 0.02. So we're going to round it just a little bit. And that did all 4 corners at the same time. We gave a slight rounding to them. All right. The transform panel that we got to before, we had to go through the 3 dots to get to more information. Another way of getting there is double clicking on any of these corner widgets. So go ahead and with your selection tool, double click on a corner widget, and you're going to get the same floating transform window that we could have had by clicking the 3 dots over here. So again, we see all the information that we saw before, plus how much we want to round these corners. All right, we need to be able to see the top and the bottom of our shape, so if you need to change your view, do that right away. All right, in this transform panel, the first thing that we want to do is unlink our 4 corners. So right now it is a chain link, and we want to click on it to put that slash through it. Now they're not all going to behave at the same way. We can do each of them differently. We're going to change the bottom left and the bottom right corners to be just plain old 0 or straight angles. So now they're straight and our top two are still rounded. And we're done transforming those. So that's just another way of doing it. So we're going to close this floating transform panel by clicking on the X at the top left of that panel. All right, this shape is still selected. We're going to change our fill color. So we're going to come over to our appearance panel. We're going to click on the fill swatch. And we're going to change it to a brown color. And it's not very descriptive, so whatever brown you want. I would go middle of the road brown because I think later we have to do a darker and a lighter. Click away from that shape to deselect it, and we can save our document at this point. So Command S or File Save. Everybody okay? All right. So we've made rectangles and rounded rectangles so far. The next thing that we're going to do is ellipses, which are ovals. And by holding a modifier key, which is the Shift key, we can make perfect ovals, which actually are circles. So how you draw a circle is with the ellipse tool holding the Shift key, and that's going to give you a perfect circle. All right, how do we get to the ellipse tool? Any guesses where it's hidden?
A little drop arrow by the rectangle tool.
Yeah, so remember that any of these tools that have that little arrow at the bottom right corner means there's more underneath. So if you click and hold, you're going to see all the different options. So we do have the ellipse tool, the polygon tool, the star tool, and the line segment tool. So we're going to switch to the ellipse tool, bring our cursor out, and same thing. We can click and drag to draw them. I'm sorry, push down our mouse and drag, or we can click once and set up the dimensions of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to click and drag. We're going to make an oval going the long way that's going to be 1.5 inches wide by 0.5 tall. So if your tool tips are on, 1.5 by about 5. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's the craziest thing. Any guess why it filled with brown?
That was the last full color we used.
Yep, last color we used. It is at the bottom of our tool panel. We have our defaults right now set up to be a brown fill and no stroke. And we also see that over here in our appearance. So it's going to just come in the way the last shape was that we did. All right. We can now also drag this, move it around without switching tools by grabbing onto that center point again, just like we did before. So we're going to drag it, or are we not? Nope, we're not going to yet necessarily. But if we wanted to move it, we can, just so you know, you can move it around. Do you guys look at my screen or whatever you can see? Do you see how by having these smart guides on, it tells me when I'm lined up with other pieces of art on the board, I get that magenta line that pops up? Mm-hmm. That's what's helpful about these smart guides too. All right. The next thing we're going to do is create a copy of this exact ellipse. We don't want to have to redraw it, we just want to make a copy. We're going to take our selection tool, so switch to that so that it has the bounding box and the tool is, or the shape is selected. And we're going to choose Edit Copy, which is Command C. And then we're going to do Edit Paste, Command V, just like in Microsoft Word or anything else. That pasted a copy in the dead center of our artboard. All right, we're just going to take this, and by using that center dot, we're going to drag it somewhere on the artboard, not in the way. Go ahead and select your original ellipse, the first one you drew, and off to the right-hand side of this bounding box, do you guys see yet another bullseye? When we hover over it, the little icon we get kind of looks like Pac-Man. Okay, that's the pie widget. Here's what it does. When we click and drag, I'm going counterclockwise. I'm basically making a pie shape, and wherever I let go, you guys can do this, it's going to cut out that piece of the pie. So by dragging that widget, you can cut out that piece of the shape. After you let go of it, the angle that you just created, there's now a pie widget up there. So you have your starting widget and then your ending pie widget, and whatever degrees you said, that's where it cut out. Over in our properties panel, with everything still selected, we're going to go to the more information in the transform panel. So those 3 dots at the bottom of the transform panel.
I didn't cut it. I don't know why I didn't cut.
Boy, we're having fun today. I'm getting cricket stuff. We did 2 of them there because I just hit delete and this one's still there. I think you made 2 copies, and then when you cut, the one below it was still showing.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead and select the one that does have the pie cut on it now. And remember, we need to go to the transform panel and click on the 3 dots for there's more information in our transform panel. So, 3rd row in our new transform panel that popped up, we see pie stuff. And if you hover over the item, you actually see a tooltip. So it says pie start angle, mine is 130, and pie end angle is 0. We want to change that start angle. Whatever you guys dragged it to is fine, but we all want to be at the same thing of 180. So type that in on your start angle and hit tab. Basically, you just cut off half of the ellipse. Okay, made a perfect slice in half. So 180 from the start angle right here. And then hit tab so that it happens. And then we're done with that floating transform window, so we can just hit escape on our keyboard, and that makes that floating extra window go away. All right. We're going to move our cursor over what was the center of the ellipse, which is, there's a blue dot there. It's still the thing that we can hook onto to move it. And we're going to drag this shape so that it snaps to the bottom edge of our brown rectangle. So we're going to click at the center point and drag it down. And when it snaps, we're going to see intersect. We're going to know that we're in the middle and that we're touching that brown rectangle at the bottom. Because our smart guides are on, we'll see that. And when you have that done, click away into a blank space to deselect everything, and we can save. All right, next thing we're going to do is change our stroke, width, and alignment. So right now, nothing on here has a stroke. That would be the outline that goes around it. You can tell that to be as small as, I think, 0.25 all the way up to, you know, many, many, many points. It can be super thin or super thick. Yep.
I need a hand fixing mistake.
Okay. Can you explain it, or do I need, is it a come back?
Yeah, I got the wrong size on my ellipse. When I was punching 180 and I hit it in the wrong box.
Oh.
My screen is one big ellipse.
Oh. Did you do Command Z on your
I
keyboard?
tried that, it still hasn't shrunk.
Okay. All right, I'll come back. Let me just, so talking about changing stroke and width and alignment, or stroke width. So we can put really skinny strokes or thick strokes or dotted strokes. The other thing that we can do is we can control where that stroke goes. So let's say it's a thick stroke, like 10 points, let's just say. Do we want it to be centered, half in our shape, half out of it? Do we want it to be attached to the outside only, or do we want it to be all 10 points on the inside? Those are the 3 different alignments. The default is that it's centered. Half of it's inside the shape, half is outside, but we can make it be other things. So with our selection tool, click on the copy of the brown ellipse, that second one that we made. And we are going to drag it down and stack it on top of our existing one. And with your smart guides on, you're going to be able to tell when you're exactly there, because all of your magenta lines and everything will be perfect. So stack it on top of where the half ellipse is. Underneath there is still that other one. We're going to change the fill color of this one to be a darker brown. So click on your fill color and go with a darker brown. And then with this one, we're going to give it a stroke color. So we need to click on the stroke swatch and we want it to be a lighter brown. How big it is, we can see right here to the right. It's probably 1 point by default. And we're going to fix that in a minute. All right, now this ellipse, what we're going to do is we're going to make it thinner, and by holding a key modifier, as we pull one of these bounding boxes, it's going to shrink from both sides at the same time, just like we did with the rectangle. So what we want to do is we're going to drag this top middle bounding point down, but as we drag down, we're going to hold Option, and we're going to get it down to the size of 0.1 inches in height, so it's going to be really narrow. Let go of your mouse and then let go of your modifier key. So what we really did was we made, now it looks kind of like a boat or a ladle, like it has an inside darker color and a ring around it. All right, we're going to change the stroke, and over here in our appearance panel we can change the color and the size, but those are the only two things we can do from this window. Any word that is underlined means there's another menu of information. So if we click on the word stroke, we're going to get an additional menu of stroke details. Caps and corners, if the stroke is an open line, you can tell it how the end of the line should be. Should it be rounded cap? Should the line stop where the line actually stops, or should it kind of protect it, as you can see in this third version? What kind of corners are you going to have, and how do you want the stroke to align? So right now the default is align stroke to the center, but we can choose inside or outside. First thing that we want to do is change the weight of our stroke up to 2. So we can click on the up arrow and go up and make it a 2-point stroke, or you could type it in or whatever. But make it a 2-point stroke, and then we want to choose, whoa, I got a little carried away with my scrolling. 2-point stroke, and then we want to align it to the inside edge, align stroke to inside. Okay, those are the two things that we needed to do in this window. We could have changed the size out here, but to get to the align stroke, you have to click on that More menu. Hit Escape on your keyboard to get that floating window out of your way. All right, now what we want to do is we want to take this brown rectangle shape that we drew first. We're going to select that with our selection tool. And right now, remember the order that they're made is how they're stacked. We made this first so it's underneath this thing. This is actually a sailboat, not a ladle. And we're going to put the mast inside the center of the sailboat. Right now it's like floating behind it and under it. So we select this, and then we go over to our quick actions over here at the bottom right, and we're going to choose the Arrange button. And the simple options are bring it all the way to the front, bring it forward 1 step at a time, backward 1 step at a time, or all the way to the back. We're going to tell it to bring to the front, and that's going to bring it on the very top stack of everything. And then we're going to click away from it to deselect it. So now that shape is stacked on top of the rest, and it looks like it's inside of that boat. Okay, do a file save. So we're good this far. And with that same ellipse tool, I told you you can make circles. Let's fit your artboard in the window. So do a Command 0 so we can see what workspace we have here. And we're going to grab our ellipse tool again. But as we're dragging, we're going to hold down the Shift key, and that's going to constrain it to a perfect circle. And we want it to be about a 1-inch circle. So start dragging with your ellipse tool, but then hold down Shift, and we're going to go to 1 inch. So we should have a 1-inch perfect circle, again filled with whatever your default fill and stroke are, which are probably brown and no stroke. Okay, without having to switch to the selection tool, we can reposition and modify this ellipse, still using the ellipse tool. We're going to go to the left middle bounding point, so this one over here. We're going to press and drag towards the center to make this circle smaller, but we're also going to hold 2 keyboard modifiers, Shift and Option, once we start dragging. So start dragging, then hold Shift, Option, and we're going to stop when we get it down to a 0.3. Let go of your mouse, then your keyboard shortcuts. Whenever you hold Shift, it constrains things to be perfect circles, which is important in the ellipse tool. And whenever you hold Option when you're resizing, it makes it either get bigger or smaller from the center out equally. So it pulled it all in together or would suck it all out together. All right, with that circle still selected, we're going to change the fill color. So click on your fill color option. And then in the swatches panel, we're going to go with a version of gray. So after all those color swatches, about 2/3 of the way down, you see a row of black to gray. Each one of those is a different percentage of black. So if you hover over the very last one in line, actually mine is, that's not the last one in line. I have big swatches. There we go. If you hover over that last one in line, you see that the color makeup of it is no cyan, 0. Hold on, I gotta hover again. No magenta, no yellow, 5 of K. So 5% black and 5% black and a whole bunch of white gives you this really light gray. So the next one over is 10% gray, then 20, 30, 40. So they have no colors mixed in but the black. The one that we want to choose is the one that is the K value of 10. So it's probably that second to the last swatch. Pick that. Let's deselect and save. And we'll stop here with a break because then we move on to a new shape and it's 9 o'clock. So at about 9:10, let's be back and we'll continue on with this chapter.